Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of 123 CMMC. My name is Dana, and I will be your host. And our guest today is Carter Shoenberg. Hello, Carter. How are you?
Hey, Dana. Thanks for having me on again. It's great to be
Good.
here.
Yes, good to have you back. Good to have you back. Today, we're going to talk about something that people may not be putting as much thought into as they should, right? So,
Yeah.
we're going to talk about MSPs and MSSPs, how to ensure conformance with CMMC 2.0, how they can, right?
Yep.
So our first question is going to be, what is meant by a security protection asset?
So it's a great question. So up until the CMMC accreditation body came out with their formal scoping guide in collaboration with the Department of Defense, there was actually a lot of spirited debate, to put it mildly, with regards to what would be construed as being in scope or out of scope. And a lot of that was focused around, well, unless the security asset is responsible for receiving or transmitting CUI, even if it's in metadata or something like that, then and only then would really be within the scope. And I think Commer has prevailed, and what they have now done is defined a security protection asset as an asset that provides security functions or capabilities to the contractor's CMMC scope, irrespective of whether it processes, stores, or transmits CUI. And I think that the rationale behind that is, and this is kind of a great segue into the topic on MSPs and MSSPs in general. If you're having a third-party business associate or trusted strategic alliance partner working with you, I wouldn't really necessarily be focusing on the angle of it's merely CUI. If you have a third party that has administrative access into your core enterprise, that's going to be the Achilles heel. And I think it's important for everybody to understand that the system security plans, your network topologies now need to clearly have this defined. Soundwave Consulting, we are actually going through a DIPCAC assessment right now. And we even had to do some like ad hoc modifications to our own documentation to align, to be able to clearly illustrate what do we have in our networking architecture that's going to be defined as a security protection asset.
This is a very important thing because, obviously most MSPs, MSSPs are going to have an admin login to an organization. So they're going to have to be taken into consideration with all of this, and to the level of that they're following everything that you're following if they have an admin access. I don't see there's any way around that, but I think some people may not necessarily, as I mentioned before, be thinking about that. So how does CMMC 2.0 impact managed service providers and managed security services providers?
So following up from my last statements, generally speaking, MSPs and MSSPs, they are the ones that are providing either network operations or security operations center management, SIM, outsource, things like that. So if you are an organization seeking a certification and you are using third parties, these third parties now need to very clearly understand what do they need to do to ensure that they're going to be able to keep you as a business customer. So with regards to, let's say, Microsoft Azure, obviously they have a GCC high environment. They have their beloved, what they call the placemat, and you can procure different levels of services and capabilities. And then it maps directly in terms of what controls within CMMC 2.0 it directly aligns with. There are other vendors that are out there. Just calling a couple names, like I know CrowdStrike. One of the reasons we went with CrowdStrike over a year ago is that they made a commitment that they were wanting to put themselves on a track as an organization at being CMMC maturity level 3, based upon the 1.0 definition of a level 3. So I think it's going to be incumbent upon the vast majority of MSPs and MSSPs that are continuing to do business with U.S. government contractors to understand that, for lack of a better way of putting it, there is a new sheriff in town. And unfortunately, terms and conditions and service level agreements, they are generally geared towards benefiting the service provider, not the client. So it's going to be incumbent upon the clients to kind of also ensure that they are raising the bar by making sure that the service level agreements, the terms and conditions, clearly define at what point and how is the MSP or the MSSP addressing what is going to be transferred to them as a security protection asset, and who, how, where, why, and when are they safeguarding those particular security protection assets.
I hate to throw this out there, and I hope I'm wrong, but isn't NIST 800-171, wouldn't this already have to be in place, supposedly?
So academically speaking,
Yep.
800-171 has obviously been around for a number of years, but in the commercial sector does, I mean, it's a commercial enterprise. So whether you're dealing with, the Amazons, the Cloudflares, those kinds of very large OEMs, well-respected organizations, they are still dealing in the commercial realm. And as a result of that, they operate under the pretense of this is a commercial business enterprise. If we have to conform because our client is asking us to, let's say, conform with an ISO standard or a SOC 2 compliance report. So they are actually doing, in many cases, similar kinds of activities for independent assessments, but not necessarily to the specificity of what CMMC 2.0 is going to be mandating.
So this is going to be a big opportunity for MSSPs that are involved in CMMC and are following all this protocol, that maybe they can gain some additional business for somebody who has an MSSP that's not necessarily doing that. So that's a good point. I didn't think about that till this. Okay, so what should business owners be thinking about to ensure conformance?
Yeah, so again, first off, it's really important to understand, and I've said this before many occasions, start with the data. First off, and really understand, do a deep dive analysis on what kind of data sets do you currently maintain, and more importantly, what type of data sets do you anticipate maintaining as a result of future contracts that you think that you're going to be pursuing. So if you start with the data types, then it's kind of easy to identify who in your company, the people, would need to have legitimate business access to those data types that might be defined as federal contract information or controlled unclassified information. And then from that point, you can then extrapolate which computing assets are associated with those individuals that now have the business need. And at what point you have either in-house on-prem, like Metal on-prem, or you have cloud defensive capabilities. There's a variety of different things that can come into play that would need to be raised to the C-suite's attention, such as if you have an ISP connection into your corporate office, how are you basically defending yourself at that point of egress? That in and of itself, if it's a, let's say we see with many smaller businesses, a Verizon firewall router, that firewall router is going to be defined as a security protection asset. And if you are using an out-of-date router firewall that's no longer supported, then it's not going to be in conformance with that. And then if you are utilizing cloud services, whether it's Zscaler, Barracuda, along those lines, it's also important to understand that those are not going to be defined as security protection assets as well. So anytime the organizations are leveraging cloud-based service providers or data hosting centers, it's important to understand, depending on what kinds of capabilities or services that they are procuring as part of their monthly service agreement, they may very well have extended the scope.
Interesting. So let me ask you, so these routers, what's the easiest way to tell whether their day has come and it's time to get another one?
Yeah, so we see this all the time. And even our own company, we had to go through this exercise with regards to understanding the make and the model. You don't have to get down to the serial number, but the make and the model is pretty easy to understand if the OEM, if the service provider is still supporting it, whether it's Verizon, whether it's, Comcast, or the larger ISPs that are out there. It's pretty clear. It's pretty self-evident in terms of whether or not they're continuing to support it. And it's usually at no additional cost. It's usually bring in your old router or firewall. They're going to give you a new one. Then it's just a matter of, you can't just accept it at face value that's pre-configured to be in conformance with CMMC. You need to make sure that you're logging in at the admin level. That's usually requiring a hardwired connection into the device itself, and making sure that the firewall configurations are going to be in conformance with CMMC.
Now, I heard this, and whether or not this is true or not, I don't know, but I think it is. And I heard that Comcast has a workaround that they can gain, the technicians can gain access to the routers. And that seems to me that that's a potential big liability. So this is maybe a month ago I heard that. I don't know if that's necessarily still the case, but that may tie. If that is, we need to find out yes or no, is that an issue or not, and that needs to be addressed too.
So along those lines, that is going to be a very, very common practice with all the OEMs that are out there. If you want the original equipment manufacturer to provide continued support for the period of performance of the devices in your possession, they are generally going to require that you have either the dreaded Telnet port 22 SSH opened to allow the remote maintenance to be able to push updates to the device itself. Now, there are workarounds that an organization seeking certification can employ as a result of that. Making sure that you're having enhanced log reviews, that you also have additional compensating controls, so you're able to see when inbound traffic is coming specifically on that port, or if you're using a cloud-based firewall to have conditional access where you're basically defining this port will be made open and only open on this day at this hour because we have it worked out with our service provider. That's the day, that's the time that they're going to be allowed to come in to do administrative maintenance on the device itself.
Okay, so that makes sense. As long as it's very spelled out, very specific, then that's gonna fly. Okay, that's good. All right. Are there any legal liabilities associated? And if so, how can business owners reduce their exposure?
Yeah, so when we're talking about the legal liabilities, again, we're trying to look at this, at least from Soundwave's perspective, on what are going to be the total cost of ownership for any business operation. And the cost calculations and also legal liability factor into those cost calculations. If you accept a service level agreement and you operate under an assumption that your service provider is doing A, B, and C, if you have a crisis event, and as a result of that crisis event during forensics analysis and incident response, you come to learn that not only was your service provider not doing A, B, and C, but contractually, there was nothing in there that required them to do so. Then the liability stops with the company itself. And I will reminisce back to a few chapters ago in my life and working with Motorola. And we were charged as the internal team to actually go do an analysis on one of their data centers that was located in the Northeast. And we presented our findings to senior leadership that also included in-house general legal counsel. And when we were providing our findings to them, we were it was a rather dismissive tone. Carter, we really don't think that you understand the service level agreement that we have with them, because it clearly says in a crisis event that here's what they're going to do. They're going to do A, B, C, D, and E. Yes, it does, but it doesn't say who's responsible for paying for that now, then does it? Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden you could just hear like a pin drop, because again, it's those costs of ownership that need to be factored into the legal liability question.
Yeah, and I think that's, I would say 90%, 99% time going to go back to the business owner, not the MSP. So that's a very good thing. Review your agreement to see what it says, and do they have time constraints in there that they're going to help you out, or what does it say? Because these are things that when you signed up with your company, however long ago, you probably haven't even looked at the agreement since then.
Yeah, and I would also say that it's important for the viewers of this session also understand, I don't think that this just kind of came about for the sake of argument. It's important to understand that in mid-2019, China was able to successfully compromise over 8 major MSPs. In 2020, the U.S. Secret Service's Global Investigations Operations Center, they've been seeing a significant increase in incidents where hackers were breaching MSPs and using them as a springboard into the internal networks of the MSP customers themselves. And just today, one of my former bosses at Internet Security Systems just posted an article saying that over 20,000 data centers management systems are exposed to hackers. Now, when we're talking about data management systems, does that necessarily correlate to they're able to get into your sensitive or regulated data? No, but if they're able to get into the management systems and effectively shut down, let's say, power management to those devices that are in your cages in the data centers. At the end of the day, if your operations come to a screeching halt because of a power outage that's associated with a cyber attack, the impacts are just the same. It's still a crisis event that has significant consequences to your daily operations.
Do you think we're ever going to see things going back in time to in-house servers?
I think that so it's interesting, and I've heard this on a number of occasions. What's your plan to migrate to the cloud? And you never really hear anybody talking about what's your plan to migrate out of the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily think that we will go back to metal on-prem just because of the advancements that have taken place in the market space. Going to the cloud was really kind of like the buzzwords starting, let's say, around 2007, 2008. Cost considerations and security considerations weren't even necessarily teased out enough to even have enough of a business justification to rip from a physical location like where I'm at and putting it into a data center. And also the concept of virtualized systems versus actually just having your own cage, that's also has evolved dramatically as well. So when you've taken into consideration that you can dramatically outsource your requirements, as an example, if you're a small business and you're using Microsoft's government cloud computing high environment, because if you use like the placemat, you're looking at like well over 85% of the controls are co-shared or directly owned by the service provider. And that's kind of a hard sell to say, let's move off of that, especially when you're talking in business terms of, I got capital expenditures for actual metal on site versus operational expenditures and how that impacts the tax performance of the company.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. All right. I just figured I'd throw that out there.
Sure.
All right. Well, this was very, very helpful. And I think this is, people are going to, a lot of little light bulbs are going to go off saying, I better go take a look at this and check out what's going on here. So
it's very important, as they say, that, the devil's in the details. And at the end of the day, when something goes wrong, you are legally bound with what is defined as within the four corners of your legally binding agreement. So making sure that you clearly understand what is in your agreement, and more importantly, what is not in your agreement is very, very important to understand and define that as a potential business risk. Is it a risk that you're willing to accept? And if you're not, what is the organizational's response for how they're going to try to mitigate that level of exposure?
Mm-hmm. Very good. Very, very good. Well, thank you so much for all your time and expertise here, Carter. I really appreciate it.
No, absolutely. Thank you for having us. Greatly appreciate being here.
Good to see you again. All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening and watching. And we hope to see you again on another episode of 123 CMMC. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Yeah.